Can you talk to me a little bit about, I guess, your development on working on the project with Walter?
Yeah, I read the book like 20 years ago and it just like stayed with me ever since. And when I heard that there was a film adaptation like in the works, I just was like, yeah, this is what I'm here for. I sort of turned up with a 90-page deck being like, this is how we do it. I refer to the kind of book and the film as being cousins, not twins. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's like a common theme in my work is like how to like slightly offset an audience expectation of something. And me and Walter are both writers on the film, but we didn't really co-write. Like he wrote some earlier drafts, and then I took over and wrote several later drafts. So in a way, it was kind of great because he would always say, look, my book is on the shelf. You're making the movie. I'd be like, yeah, man. And a novel is obviously like the finest art form in the world, but a novel and a film can't and don't do the same things.
Mm.
And so you have to find a visual language, you have to find a kind of palette for those things. And I feel like in many ways the film is probably like darker and more baroque and more kind of lonely than the novel, which are obviously really interesting cinematic things to do. Do you know what I mean? Like a body alone in space is a very interesting thing. So yeah, so it was very nice to have kind of Walter's blessing and to have his kind of previous drafts to keep referring back to. But then you have to make something personal, and actually, although it's my first screenplay, I've written a lot of screenplays since,
Mm.
and it's sort of made me go. It's just very difficult to make a film that's not personal to you, and it's very difficult to put your person into a film unless you write it. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure it's possible. I just don't know how to do it. One day I'll figure it out.
Amazing. And I guess in terms of obviously your background is in theatre and in that sort of world, what did you carry from the theatre space into this particular body of work? Was there anything that whether it was like staging or blocking, or what was that like?
Yeah, I think it's just working with actors. Like I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of actors in my life, which is, somebody told me that it was a great advantage, and I was just like, thanks. I don't really even think about it because I'm so like used to it. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like, and I think that therefore, and how to rehearse, and particularly when you don't have a lot of time, and we rehearsed Willem and Corey separately because I wanted to keep them separate until they met on set, which was super fun. And yeah, but I think also it's like. In theatre, when you're blocking a play or something for an audience, you're obviously trying to kind of be democratic and to make sure the cheap seats have as good a view as the most expensive seats in the house. But it's all about physical picture telling a story in the same way. Do you know what I mean? Like it's three-dimensional and live. And that doesn't change in film except for you've got more room. Like because the camera can do things that the human eye can't do naturally. So in a way, film feels a lot more freeing and a lot more like, oh, you mean we could just bring in a crane and then we could like shoot it from the top? Do you know what I mean? Like, what? So I was having like a whale of a time. I felt like freer and more creative than I have done like for ages.
That's really beautiful to hear. And I think, yeah, adapting to this new medium, it very definitely suits you. I think, obviously, cinematically, the film is stunning, and that's, you've got a cinematographer on board there and a DOP, well, DOP. And, like, the work is stunning. The placement, obviously, like the shots are also stunning. So thank you for that. Like, you have these really arresting moments when they're in the basement and it's that kind of split screen.
Yeah, split diopter. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, like obviously, like I know that like there's obviously reasoning behind everything, every single shot that you make, but about some of those kind of crucial shots in the basement, that split, that sort of very visually arresting framing of the face with the light and the dark and the shade. Why those shots? And I guess what did you hope that they would elevate to that moment in the basement?
Yeah.
Basement already so heightened.
I think when you're working in a very limited physical space and you've
Mm.
only got two actors in that space, you've got to really measure out across the whole film how you're going to turn up the dial. So I storyboarded the whole film and I did it myself rather than working with a storyboard artist, which meant that there were like loads of just like really terrible pencil drawings. But it really forces you to sit there and go like, what is the moment, the key image that is going to tell this scene. In the basement, we not only had limited physical space, but we also had very limited light. You know, we had three practical lights, and that was it. And we committed to that being how we were gonna tell the story. Obviously, you kind of help them along, but it's like, look, there are only three
Yeah.
light bulbs in this room. So then you got to go, well, what can we do to sort of change the kind of temperature and all those things? So me and my DP Ula Ponticos really plotted out the whole journey of the basement. You know, we were very kind of influenced by some of the films of like Jonathan Demme and how you'd also don't have to be in like a naturalistic space. Like a lot of those split diopter shots are like a real like, huh, okay, we've jumped into a different, slightly more expressive form of storytelling. But we always chose the shots to express like how the characters were feeling, who was winning or losing in a scene. Do you know what I mean? Like very small like shifts in eye line and things like that, and then the camera angle shifting in the opposite direction. You know, there were just lots of things where we were like, these are very small changes, but actually, as we go through the film, they'll feel bigger and bigger. So like that's like split the first split diopter shot where like Willem's massive and Corey is really small. It sort of tells you who's looking at who. Do you know what I mean? Like where the kind of focus of the scene is. And also, I love 70s cinema, and I think we should bring back the split diopter as much as possible because they're super fun.
I think we'd be quite remiss not to talk about some of the themes of this project. There are really big themes kind of in the book and then obviously also in this film. You know, reclamation of self, I think, and heritage is a really, really big one. And I guess going in with your two leads, did you kind of grapple with that in like research and like separately beforehand? And how was that?
Yeah, I think you know, I've made a lot of work that deals with really big themes, and I think people are always surprised by how much we don't talk about them because I feel like that's the kind of individual's work. And when you're actually working on a performance or a production, you know, you have to do the practical work. You have to do the kind of physical work and not the psychological. You know, I'm sort of not that interested in conversations about psychology rather than like somebody does this and then somebody does that. And that may seem inexplicable, but psychology will connect those two things. You know, like it's fine. I think that mainly the kind of research work, you know, I sent everyone working on the film like a huge watch list maybe a year before we started, but it wasn't necessarily things that were anything to do with the film. It was more about understanding my POV, just like who I was as a person and kind of which films brought me to here. Do you know what I mean? Like and things I was thinking about. For me, Willem had a slightly different journey because his character has such an extremely different experience from Willem's own experience that he had to do a lot more watching about sort of I guess like people who came from extreme like political experiences or extremely violent experiences. So like we watch films like, you know, The Act of Killing or The Laughing Man, which is a documentary about an ex-Nazi who ends up in West Africa after World War II, or Renzo Martin's film Enjoy Poverty. You know, like people, you know, like with these quite extreme experiences of conflict. But that was just for him to kind of shift his thinking across to like a different moral temperature. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like to be like, okay, cool, this is the world that this person lives in. It doesn't
Mm.
explain his psychology, but I now sort of understand the world that he's in a bit more. But we also did like loads of you know, reading around like underground space and the effect on the body, or like going into deep space, or going on a submarine, or you know, and just like different things that would influence how the story operates, rather than like we're necessarily going to dig hard into the notion of artifacts and reparations and you know and all those things are there. We're politically It's a very politically turned on and intellectually turned on cast in that way, so they would do, you know, I mean, like they were thinking those things and reading those books themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like that was like, but in a way it was like I think the script just encouraged them to go there. Like it was like I should know more, I should think about these things. um you know, I was funny because I think Matty Diop's film Dahomey came out maybe as we were editing or something like that, and I was like, man, I wish this film had been around about a year ago. Joe, this would have been real useful. I mean, it's a bloody masterpiece. It's just one of the best films ever.
It's one of these films where, you know, you can kind of pull apart and start to see those themes. And then when you're leaving the cinema or when you've switched off your TV, you're going to be like, oh, wait, let's go back and talk about that moment because that was
Yeah.
actually really visually arresting, but also makes me think about my own sort of self and how I've dealt with maybe family trauma, or how I even interact with my friends and how they see me and how I see them. And I think there's so much in that you can really pull apart and kind of grapple with.
I think that's the final act of any piece of
Mm,
art. The
yeah.
final, it's the thing's not over until I always talk about this in theatre. I'm like the final act is what people are talking about in the bar afterwards. Like,
Mm,
are they talking about anything in the bar afterwards? Have you, and I'm always trying in my work to leave a question in people's minds that they, maybe think about on the tube home. Do you know, maybe they suddenly, like a month later, they're just like, yeah, fuck, what was that? Do you know what I mean? Like, why do I feel like actually I should have kept all my grandmother's laces or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I sort of feel like it's something that me and our composer Robert Oakey or Rulo talked about a lot, but ending the film on an inhale, like feeling like there was somewhere else to go.
yeah. Do you see the house as a sort of third main character in this film?
Yeah, I think so because I felt like there's this sort of notion in it's kind of again philosophical notion of like, oh, he's lived 8 generations and that's like a terrible weight on him. But we were always interested in like what that practically meant. So we were always trying to layer in, we had a big family tree that we drew up, and we were trying to layer in like what the kind of physical kind of stain that each generation had left behind was. So, different periods, like the window treatments are different periods to the ceiling, which are different treatment to the floor. Like the kitchen is, the windows are Art Deco, the furniture's arts and crafts. The kitchen is like super 60s. The TV is from the 80s. Do you know what I mean? Like this sort of like practical idea that you were like living amongst the living history of your family, not just this sort of like grand idea of what artifacts are, but that like, that's the fridge my grandmother bought, and that's the bed that my mother was born in, and that every house we live in is a living history. So I worked a lot with our designer Catherine Eder to sort of build a sense of the people who had been in that house, and then the
Mm,
house kind of becoming those people.
mm,
So that when you sort of talk about like ghosts in the film, he's surrounded by ghosts all the time. Every time he sits on a piece of furniture, it's like the ghost of the person who bought it, which I loved, because ghosts aren't always scary. Sometimes, what's the difference between a ghost and an ancestor?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, a ghost is just an ancestor that's pissed off at you. Um, so yeah, I sort of liked it that he sort of moves from being afraid of ghosts to kind of accepting his ancestors. And the
Yeah.
ancestors is not like a faraway notion. It's not, at points in the film, it's like, ah, my ancestors, who came over here, during the transatlantic slave trade or whatever, or not, which is a big thing in the film that
Mm,
they were always free people. They've never been slaves. But yeah, I think that it's like, oh, an ancestor is not like a lofty notion. It's just the family who came before you.